Well, hello rally friends and welcome back to my kitchen table. It's been a little while, hasn't it, since we actually sat here at the kitchen table. There have been a few since I was here last, and there has been one massive event. But listen, probably for the one and only time, rare occasion this, I am going to kick off my kitchen table talking about Formula One. It'll never happen again, don't you worry. But it might, depending on what this man does in Formula One. But biggest news since Rally Australia, for me anyway, was the news that Robert Kubica, that supremely talented man, has secured a return to Formula One. Now, do you know what? It is one of the greatest comebacks, I think, in the history of motorsport. It's quite astonishing that a man who is, let's face it, he'll never describe himself as disabled, but he is disabled. He is a disabled driver. He has learned to drive with what he calls his limitations. Others would call them disabilities, but he doesn't label himself in that kind of way. He sees it as a limitation and he works with a limitation, and he has quite remarkably secured a full-time drive with the Williams team in Formula One for 2019. And I couldn't be happier, because do you know what? I've rarely met a more likable man in motorsport than Robert Kubica, and I have never met a more determined man. I'll tell you when I first met him. I'll tell you a little story, shall I? It was Rally Portugal, and it must have been round about 2012, 2013 maybe, when he was coming into the World Rally Championship. It was Citroën he was driving with, an R5 car, I seem to think. I can't honestly remember. It was a test in Portugal. And we'd been told beforehand, I was at the test, there was only a handful of us media folk at the test. It was part actually of a much bigger test. But Kubica was there. It was set up with the Citroën guys in the corner, and we'd been told he wasn't going to give any interviews. So I, being a little bit intrigued, a little bit of a fanboy, you might say, you know, we've got this massive Formula One star, previous Formula One winner, coming to join us in the world of rally after what was a terrible, terrible accident. So as a bit of a fanboy, I wandered over to Mr. Kubica's service area, and I stood there, as lots of fans do, on the outside. Didn't venture in, wasn't really confident enough, would you believe, to venture in and say hello to Mr. Kubica. But I stood there on the outside watching the service, and then he wandered along and he wandered by. I thought, well, he's a chance, I'm just going to say hello to him. And I kind of put my hand in the air and went, Robert, excuse me, can I introduce? And I got as far as that, and he went, Colin, you don't need to introduce yourself. I know exactly who you are. And for me, the smile that put on my face was astonishing. And you know, I said to him, I said, well, how do you know who I am, Mr. Kubica? He said, what do you think I've been doing during my convalescence for the past 12 months, 18 months? He said, I listen to rally radio almost from the start of every round of the championship till the end of it. He said, I know exactly who you are, nice to meet you. And you know what, that was the start of a really good relationship that I had with Robert. And you know, I was very fortunate in that I actually shared dinner with him a couple of times. I was able to sit and listen to him talking, not about his own personal struggles, but about the circus that is Formula One. And to hear his stories from someone who was very much on the inside of Formula One was phenomenal. Those stories were great, but what was greater was his fortitude, was his resilience, was his ability to focus single-mindedly on what he wanted to achieve. And yes, he achieved things in rallying. He led the Monte Carlo Rally. He won stages on the Monte Carlo Rally. He was WRC2 champion in 2014, I think it was. But he was focused on a return to Formula One. And he told me once, look, I've had quite a lot of offers, and big money offers, to go back to circuit racing, DTM, other forms of circuit racing, sports cars. He said, but you know what? I'm not interested. If I go back to circuit racing, it's going to be to Formula One. And I will admit that I thought at the time, well, you know, highly unlikely, Robert. It's not going to happen. When you see just how limited the use is in his, what is it, his right arm, isn't it? It was just inconceivable to think that he could actually make it back in the cutthroat world of Formula One, that he could make it back to the very pinnacle of that sport. But to say that was to ignore the man's determination, the man's ability the man's drive. And you know, in Formula One, it's a hard world. And you know, he's managed to come back after what, 7 years to secure that seat, and it is almost miraculous. It is almost miraculous, and I take my hat off to Robert Kubica for everything he does. He is the most eminently likeable person I think I've ever met in motorsport anyway. He's so down to earth, he's so approachable, but he is fierce in his single-mindedness and his determination. And I keep my fingers crossed that he succeeds in his return to Formula One. The level of his success may ultimately not be restricted by his limitations in his arm, his right arm, but by the machinery that he's given. But fair play to Williams, for giving Robert Kubica the opportunity to once again drive competitively a Formula One car. It is, I think, the greatest comeback story in the history of motorsports. Certainly right up there, that's for sure. He was very close to death, and when he did pull through, he was very close to losing the arm completely. The function in the arm is incredibly limited. You know, 99.9% of the time you say it's impossible to drive at the top level with that, you know, that level of disability. But he's proved us all wrong, and well done to Robert Kubica. So there we are. Spent a little bit too much time talking about that, but it deserved it. It deserved a mention, Formula One at the kitchen table. Let's move on. Let's move on to the magnificence of Rally Australia, because it was a fitting way to end the season. What a battle we saw. And you know what? The right man won the championship. Oh, I know a lot of you are going to say you're a huge fan of Ogier's. Yes, I am, because he does things right. I'm not only a fan of Ogier's, I'm a fan of M Sports. And I'm a fan of Thierry Neuville's, and I'm a fan of Wout Tanak's. But he did everything right this year. He stuck to it. He didn't make any silly mistakes. Take out Turkey, obviously, which is still unexplained. Doesn't really matter now, does it, Turkey? But he did everything right. He did everything right from a personal point of view. The team did everything right to support him. They gave him a car that worked everywhere. There is absolutely no doubt that M Sport Fiesta is not the best car on the stages right now. It's certainly not the fastest. But what it is it's one of the most solid, one of the most reliable. Its window of operation is massive. It works well when you've got a loop of stages where it's wet in the first couple of stages, dry in the last stage. It can work in those circumstances. That is not the same with all the other cars. So Malcolm Wilson has given, or did give, Ogier the tools to do the job. And Ogier, he was like a thoroughbred racehorse in the Derby. He kind of paced himself a bit this year, didn't he? And he was mid-pack for a little while, but he just built his pace up. He built his momentum. He built ahead of steam. He put pressure on those in front of him coming towards the end of the season. Then bang, in the last furlong, on the last rally, he just absolutely shot ahead and showed his brilliance, showed his pedigree, and won his 6th title. And many congratulations to him, and massive congratulations to Malcolm Wilson. We cannot downplay the job that Wilson and M Sport have done over the past 2 years. The manufacturers and the drivers last year was magnificent. To repeat even one of those this year was going to be twice as difficult. Impossible, I think, to repeat both the drivers and the manufacturers with the lineup that they had. But they won again, M Sports. You know, they are diminutive compared to the might of Toyota, the absolute might of Hyundai, and the returning might of Citroën. Really a remarkable story. We talked about Kubica's story being a fairy tale story, one of the greatest comebacks in motorsport. Well, do you know what? The M Sport story for me is one of the great achieving stories in motorsport. You know, what they did last year, what they've done this year, you know, it stands right up there in terms of great achievements in motorsport for particularly the smaller companies. But what does it mean? What does it all mean for next year? Well, do you know what? I'm going to just give a wee nod to Thierry Neuville here, because here's my take on Neuville. My take is that Neuville drove that car at 110%, probably for 2/3 of the season. Overdrove the car, had to. Had to because it wasn't giving him what he needed. I think there's a lot of work to do there. A lot of work to do to get that Hyundai into the zone that the M Sport car is in, which is a zone where it operates effectively across a wide spectrum of conditions. And on top of that, because what we found is when it was loose, when it was wet, when it was drying, drivers found it very difficult. All four drivers found that Hyundai difficult to set up and to get a consistent balance on. They have to solve that problem. They have to widen that window of operation of the car. And on top of that, I think they have to make it a little bit faster. Because what we have with the Toyota is a car that does operate across all those different conditions in a loop of stages. And it operates at absolutely breakneck speed, particularly with Ott Tanak behind the wheel. Huge, huge pressure on Hyundai next year to deliver either a driver's or a manufacturer's title, and it is going to be tough. They will have to make some quite big strides forward, serious developments to that car, I think, to give Thierry Neuville the package that he needs, that matches his skill, his determination, that matches his drive to be world champion. It's just not been there this year, particularly the latter part of the year. Do you know, he didn't get on the podium on gravel after he won in Sardinia. He only had one podium after Sardinia, and that was Germany. Just wasn't good enough. And I'm not putting the blame at the door of Thierry Neuville, because I thought Thierry Neuville, in some ways, had a better season this year than he had last year. In fact, in many ways. But I think the others caught up and passed the performance of that Hyundai. It's going to be a tough year for them. And I also think that next year, this is going back to Australia again, you know, and what we saw in Australia, M Sport, tiny little M Sport, gave Sébastien Ogier the machinery and the service. Let's not forget that. They gave him everything he wanted. Everything he wanted. You know, and when I say that, I don't just mean in terms of machinery, in terms of, you know, the environment that he was working in suited him. Didn't have to do PR days. Flew in late to events. Went home early. He left Coffs Harbour on Sunday evening. Himself and Malcolm were probably the only two that actually got away from Australia on Sunday night. And he's able to do that, and that makes him feel comfortable in M Sport. They gave him everything. Now he's gone to Citroën for a mega bucks deal, we're told. Citroën have to give him the package. They have to give him the package. If he is not in a position where he is challenging next year for the championship, what does that say about Citroën? Well, it says that M Sport, as a privately run little company, are doing a better job. I don't think that'll happen, because I think Citroën, I think the momentum is going the right way. From what I hear, there are some big upgrades to that C3, really big. There's an engine upgrade, there's some aero upgrades. Ogier will be involved in getting that car exactly as he wants it. Now, if we remember back to last year, it did take him 4 rallies until he was comfortable. I think it was 4, we were 4 or 5 in until he was comfortable with the M Sport Fiesta. A similar thing might happen in 2019. It might take 2 or 3, maybe 4 rallies till he's absolutely comfortable with the car. But Pierre Boudard is an impressive man. He's doing the right job at Citroën. He's pushing things in the right direction. The car is coming on, but the pressure's enormous. The pressure is enormous. They've got the 6 times world champion. They've got the mega bucks driver. They have to give him the machinery to deliver. But the ones that they're all going to have to beat, I suspect, next year are Toyota. And Toyota is looking fantastic. Ott Tanak just looks, almost looks unbeatable, but there's always little things that tend to creep in. Should have won, potentially. Australia was going to be difficult for him to win. He did make a mistake quite early on, but he certainly should have won in Spain. He should have won in GB. He did win, obviously, 3 rallies before that. There are a number of rallies where little things happened, and you know, we'll not apportion blame there because we're not quite sure what happened on those various events. But you know, if Ott Tanak and Toyota have a clean season next year, they'll be almost untouchable. You've got to factor in, clearly, Chris Meek. What can he do? Perhaps even more pertinently, you have to factor in Jari-Matti Latvala, you know, a magnificent winner in Australia, because he is looking to me better than he's ever looked. Now, I wrote a piece in Motorsport News last week saying, might we be, you know, perhaps ignoring, when we talk about Meek, when we talk about Tanak, when we talk about Ogier, and we talk about Neuville for 2019, and might we be ignoring one very obvious potential challenger, and that's Jari-Matti Latvala. You know, he's in a very, very strong place right now, Latvala. He feels wanted within the team. He knows his place within the team. There is no pressure on him to perform. He's enjoying his motorsport, which he hasn't done in the past. He's not as self-critical as we've seen him before. And if it happens, it happens. If he wins, if he's there on the podium, great. He's not putting himself under pressure to achieve that. And what we've seen, particularly in the second part of the year, is consistency and pace from Latvala. Now, could Latvala do a Burns next year? We will have, for sure, Tanak. We will have Meek. We will have Ogier. We will have Neuville pushing for wins on every rally. They won't all finish every rally. At the level that they perform at, it won't happen. And those wins over the season, they'll be spread out. What does that mean? Spread out between 4 or 5 or maybe 6 drivers again next year. Well, it means that a driver who's got maybe a slightly more conservative approach, maybe a less gung-ho approach for the wins, driver who consistently picks up podiums, never out of the top 4, top 5, wins in his strong rallies. In Latvala's case, that would be Finland for sure, and Sweden. You know, there is an opportunity there for Latvala next year. And I mentioned this in my column. In fact, the column was about that. And I then put that on my Facebook page. And my goodness me, over 100 comments. A lot of people saying, what have you been drinking, Col? Well, do you know what? I'm thinking slightly laterally. And we need to. Remember Richard Burns, when he won the title, didn't win a rally that year. He won one rally. He was the most consistent driver, perhaps not the most outright quickest driver. And I think there's an opportunity for someone to do that next year. Now, it might not be Latvala. You know, it might be the number 2 at Hyundai, whoever that might be. Well, it looks like Andreas Mikkelsen, doesn't it? We don't know yet because they haven't told us. It could be the number 2 or the number 1 driver at M Sport. It could be a Teemu Sunninen. Who knows? But there is an opportunity next year. The point that I'm making, with our 4 or 5 top drivers, bang, 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 dropping points where they put the car off the road because the level of competition will be massive. There is an opportunity for someone to quietly accumulate points next year if they're on the podium consistently, winning the odd rally. There is that opportunity. And if they get to the last rally or 2 of the season and they're there with a chance, Latvala could be the man, then anything could happen next year. It's not a foregone conclusion that Tanak will win it. He is, in my view, the favourite. Certainly not a foregone conclusion that Neuville will win, nor Ogier. Ogier is going to, I think, have a really, really tough battle next year. But it all depends on what those very clever boys and girls at Citroën are going to do with that, if you like, that evolution of that C3 for Ogier. It's going to be a fascinating year. It really is going to be a fascinating year. But you know, let me know what you think about the Latvala situation. I don't think it's crazy, and I'm going to have a few euros on him, that is for sure. Now, really that's what I wanted to talk about in terms of our year this year, and perhaps looking forward a little bit. There will be a review of this year. I might even find someone to come along to the kitchen table to have a review with me. But the other thing I wanted to talk about, now, a little bit of Groundhog Day here, is Rally Australia and the criticism that Rally Australia has taken since the event finished a few days ago. You know, from a couple of quarters, people saying, well, you know, we're in the middle of nowhere, it's not a fitting end to the season. Let's just get this straight. You know, that is the first time that the last event of the year has been the deciding event. The first time in 10 years that we've had that situation. So you know, it's nonsense. You know, where'd you put Australia? You've got to put it really in the first 2/3 of the year if you don't want Australia to be the deciding round, potentially the deciding round of the season. I saw no problems whatsoever with having Australia as the last round of the season, and I'll tell you why. The pictures, the images, the stories, the drama that was coming out of Australia were just magnificent. Some of the best helicopter shots that we've seen all year. You know, you had those wonderful shots on the coast, you had the wonderful forest shots, almost jungle, you had wonderful hills and mountains, and it looked spectacular. Jumps, the photographers had a field day, they loved it. They absolutely loved it. The cameraman shooting the great footage for the WRC guys, shot some beautiful stuff. And the vast majority of the tens of millions of people who followed Rally Australia were waking up on Saturday morning, on Sunday morning, and on Monday morning to the most amazing footage. The most amazing footage and the most amazing stories. What is wrong with that? Absolutely nothing in my books. Absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. Yeah, they could have had a few more spectators in the stages, but credit where credit's due. They increased their official spectator figures by 32% this year. There were 84,000 people out in the stages. Now, you might not have seen them on the footage, and that's another thing we should be giving credit to the Rally Australia organisers for, because an awful lot of those 84,000 spectators were folk from the Coffs Coast, from the region, maybe a few hours up the coast, a few hours down the coast, coming to what was a world-class event. They weren't die-in-the-wool rally fans. So what they did was they followed the very, very well publicised instructions of the organisers, and they went to the spectator spots. So as we saw in the final stage, the spectator areas within the stages were really, really well attended. And there weren't strays, at dodgy points all the way through the stages. The majority of the spectators in Rally Australia went to the spectator points because they were well publicised. The facilities there were good on a lot of them. And that's where the spectators were. So they were in one or two places on each stage. Magic. It's a perfect formula for rallying. Yes, we had the lunatic fringe showing up again. Two completely brain-dead morons. It can happen anywhere. You cannot legislate for two brain-dead morons. And, I saw that and I thought, my goodness me, all the hard work that the Rally Australia organisers do, from the very top, from Mr. Rainsford, the chairman, all the way down to the marshals, they all do a magnificent job. We are made to feel remarkably welcome. They do all they can in Coffs Coast. Here is the important thing as well. A lot of talk about maybe we should be looking at Sydney. Not going to happen. I talked about this last year. We are not going back to Perth. That absolutely will not happen. And yet, one or two people saying, I remember when I was driving in Perth and there were tens of thousands of people in the stages. That was the late 90s and the early 2000s. It was the same on every rally all around the world. There were 3 or 4 or 5 times the spectator numbers on a lot of the rallies in the late 90s. It wouldn't happen. It won't happen for a number of reasons. We're definitely not going back to Perth. Rally Australia is supported by the New South Wales government. When we were at the gala dinner, we were very fortunate to have a number of local politicians there. Mr. Fraser, Andrew Fraser, the local MP for Coffs Harbour, who is the biggest rally fan in the world and has been instrumental in securing the funding from the New South Wales Tourist Board that allows the rally to happen. So Mr. Fraser was there, as was the Minister for Tourism from New South Wales, and he stood up and he made a speech and he said, look, we love rallying. We love the exposure that this gives the Coffs Coast around the world. We love the fact that the teams come to Coffs Harbour and that we're allowed to look after them and to host them. And we don't mind spending the money, and we are prepared to commit budget to coming years. That is so important, that you have local government backing your rally, that you have organisers who are prepared to back the championship as well as the rally, organisers who are prepared to go the extra mile, to innovate, to make rallies safe and exciting and interesting. All of those things, the Rally Australia organisers, in conjunction with the promoter, with Kennards, the wonderful sponsor, and in particular in conjunction with the New South Wales government, all of those things happen in Coffs Harbour. Yes, you might not see quite so many spectators, but that is one element. And as I say, massive credit to the organisers for increasing their attendance by 31%. But attendance figures are one small part of rallying. They really are. Having the funding, having the backing to put on a successful and safe rally, for me, is the most important thing. And they do that in Coffs Harbour. And, as I say, You go to wrc.com, you go to YouTube, you have a look at the McLean photo gallery, any of the photographers' photo galleries, and you will see the most incredible images that came out of Australia. That's important. You know, if we accept that Australia and New Zealand have to form part of the World Rally Championship, and I think most people do, and that we have to go down to that part of the world. And you know what? People that complained, the one or two complaints, we had it the same last year, I'm going to put it down to jet lag. I think people get a little bit grumpy when they go down south to the other half of the world. And I think that sometimes they don't think really before they speak. I'm guilty of that a lot, I know. But I think jet lag plays a big part in it. You know, they don't really consider the whole picture, and you have to consider the whole picture with Rally Australia. It offers something very different, very unique. They are welcoming beyond what you would expect. And they put on a fantastic event. And we do love it. The vast majority of people who go down there absolutely love it. So well done to the organisers of Rally Australia for once again, okay, a couple of small incidents, and I'll give them that, you know, they need to be looked into. But other than that, it was a huge success. And I can't wait to go back. I love it every time. So there we are, folks. From the kitchen table, it's been quite a long one once again. I have to say, listen, mugs. My mug, your mug at the kitchen table. These guys, whoa, let's just have a wee sip of this. Look, this is the kitchen table mug. Who are these? This is from the guys at motorsportmugs.co.uk. Motorsportmugs.co.uk. One word. Motorsport mugs. And it's from the Kirby Lonsdale Motor Club, the Devil's Own Rally. Look, he didn't just send me one, he sent me three. He sent me three mugs. Devil's Own Rally, that one. Nice little mug, very good. But I do like this one. Very simple. But it's the Ari Vatanen quote on the Rally Isle of Mine. Oh dear God, oh dear God. And that, I assume, are the notes that, was it Harriman, I think it was, wasn't it? That was the co-driver on that occasion. So yeah, once again, if you do want your mug for your event or your club, if you want to have your mug featured at the kitchen table, and this is a mug, mine is the only mug, but a drinking mug, drop me a note. Be very happy to receive your mugs and talk about your club at the kitchen table. So folks, once again, thank you very much for listening. Again, if you're watching on Facebook and you've enjoyed the kitchen table, press that little share button. Do me a huge favor, it would be fantastic. If you're watching on YouTube, if you could subscribe if you haven't already done so, and many of you have, if you could subscribe to my channel, that would help me out. So Facebook, give us a wee share, YouTube, subscribe. Folks, thank you very much.